doing your study. Now, in the Bloom, Crumpton, and Anderson study, they observed Tarkanian at all practice sessions during the entire season. So they are in a gym, they're in a natural setting for this particular study. So for our study, what behaviors to observe? They observed his Tarkanian's coaching behaviors. Our subject was Jerry Tarkanian, and where they observed him was in the gymnasium during practices over an entire season. Now, the next question is, how many observations should you make? And this is really dependent on a few things. Number one of them is time. How much time do you want to observe somebody, your subject? How much time do you have? The researcher, what is a session? Is it a class session? Is it the whole, let's say every single class, so it really depends on how many observations you want to make and how much time do you have. The number of observations to be made and the number of subjects and observers do you have. You have 50 different subjects you got to look at, but it's only one person. Well, that's really not going to actually work. So that's just another variable that's part of how many observations you're going to make. Another thing that makes the determination on how many observations you make is the type of behaviors you're going to observe. And also the other factor is the activity duration. Does the activity last a certain amount of time? So that's going to make the determination on what you're going to do. For the Bloom, Crumpton, and Anderson study, they used the revised coaching behavior recording form, which had the 12 categories, and they made observations over typically a 2-hour practice period, and they chose to do it for the entire season, as I said. So how many observations were they looking for? They were looking at 12 different categories over a 2-hour or 2-hour plus period over the entire practice season. When to observe it, again, there's a lot of crossover between each one of these questions in these areas. When will the observations be made? Again, depending on the research purpose and question. Our study that we're using, every practice during the season, and 2 researchers made their observations. So we had 2 people over the entire season. Now, a little bit longer question here is how to score the observations. There are 4 different methods to collect data. This is what we're talking about. How do we actually collect data? And the first one we're going to talk about is called a narrative or continual recording. And this is a difficult one, I think, as the observer records a series of sentences of the occurrences that they observe. So they're just sitting there listening, and they hear something and they write it down. I mean, this is hard, and you can see the problem with that, just trying to record everything. Obviously, the easiest way to do this one is videotape or audio record, and that way you have time to write down the highlights that you're looking for. Again, you still have to have clearly defined things that you're looking for here. This is a really difficult method of doing observations, but this is just one way of doing observations and one method of calculating the data as narrative, just writing down the high points that you're looking for. The next way to calculate, or score your observation is called tallying, getting tallies, or frequency counting. And just like it sounds like, you record each occurrence or frequency of a defined behavior each time it happens for a specific period. So each time it happens, you score. Each time you see it, you say you're going to do this for an hour-long session. Each time you see a particular behavior, you just score it and you give it a tally for that particular behavior. The interval method is like the frequency method, except this one the researcher wants to know whether certain behaviors happen in a certain interval of time. So what the observer does is, like, they make a decision that they're going to observe, let's say, a teacher teaching for a half an hour period, and every 10 seconds they look up and see what behavior that teacher is doing at that period in time every 10 seconds, and they record that. And they have a score sheet that's for every 10 seconds they code what behavior. They may have 10 different behaviors they're looking for, and every 10 seconds they code the behavior that the teacher is making during that every 10-second interval over the 30 minutes. This is how academic learning time in physical education is used. It's an interval scoring sheet, so every 10 or 15 seconds you score whatever behavior the teacher is doing at that period of time. The last method is a duration method. Similar to the other ones, the observer measures the length of time a subject displays a particular behavior. So if we're looking for sarcasm, when a teacher is being sarcastic, the observer records how long the teacher is being sarcastic. And so they're looking for particular behaviors, and they just record. They have a stopwatch and record how long the particular subject has that behavior. So in our study, the one we're using, the Bloom, Crumpton, and Anderson study, again they use the method, the revised coaching behavior recording form. This is a frequency method. Each time a behavior was displayed, it was tallied. You can find that on page 163. And so that's what they used for their study. The other thing there is using videotape or audio tape. And again, you have to get permission of everybody who's involved there to videotape. Then you can go back and go through it on your own. So it's a good tool to use. You just have to get permission for using videotape. Let's talk about evaluation real quick. When you evaluate the data after you use one of these methods, the data is evaluated through descriptive statistics, means, frequencies, and percentiles. As you can see in the study about Tarkanian, as it would be expected, Tarkanian used tactile instructions the most during practice, 29% of the time. That was the type of verbal displays he used, his coaching behaviors during practice. And so that's kind of how we had analyzed the data for observational research, is through means, standard deviations, percentages, and those type of things. Now, what are the weaknesses of observational research? Some weaknesses here are that definitions may not be accurate and not really describe the behavior correctly, and then the data and the conclusions are wrong or erroneous. So that's a big weakness, is if you don't clearly define the behaviors. Another weakness of this type of study is that observers must be trained and know what to observe for. It really limits the number of behaviors that you can observe, because you can't observe everything. Even if you have 2 people or 3 people, you still are limited because of that. Another weakness is that some behaviors cannot be observed. You can't define it, and you really can't observe for it. The other thing that is a weakness is that the observer may change the behavior of the observed. For example, just having people there observing you may change the way you actually act over time. And that's one of the reasons why Typically with these observational type studies, it's a longitudinal study. It's over time, so people get used to having other people around. And this is especially true if you use videotape. You may actually have people act differently because they're on TV. They know they're being recorded. Other thing is, it's time consuming. It'd be wise if you have more than one observer. They have to be trained. If you read the article about from Bloom, Crumpton, and Anderson, you'll notice that they did what's called inter-rater reliability testing to make sure that two people who are observing had similar numbers. They saw similar things, and so there was consistency. You're not just relying on one individual. But if you have more than one, if you have 2 or 3 people observing, you got to make sure they're observing the same thing. And